Welcome back to today's episode of Lurk Talks, a podcast where I'm Lurk and I talk. I talk about everything from pop culture to true crime and everything in between. I want to also start this episode off with a content and trigger warning for sexual assaults, suicide, overall harm, violence in general. So please take care of yourself first and foremost while listening, or you know what? I'll see you when there's a lighter episode. Please put your mental health first. Now, in this week's episode, I want to explore the real life Squid Games. That's right. The popular Netflix series Squid Games is based on a few events that actually happened. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the Netflix show Squid Game, it follows a group of people who are deeply in debt and struggling in life. They receive an invitation to play children's games for a chance to win a large cash prize. However, the games become deadly, and failing means losing your life. As the contestants compete, they form alliances, face tough choices about trust and betrayal, and the story explores themes of desperation, morality, and the lengths people will go for money. They must decide what matters most as they fight for survival. I remember when I first watched the show when it originally came out and how horrific it was, but also how interested I was in continuing watching it. But again, you're listening to me talk right now, and I've already mentioned that I love to talk about serial killers and true crime. So of course this piqued my interest, and if you watch the show, you can't judge me. You can't judge me. Now, with the second season out and a third, or technically second half of season 2 will be coming out soon, I wanted to talk about the real life events that people actually suffered. We have a few events we need to go back and talk about, but to start, I'd like to go off what the creator of the show has stated. Now, according to a few articles online, and I'm so sorry for my pronunciation, Kwang Dong-hyuk, the director and writer, has said in interviews that the inspiration of the series' protagonist, Seong Ji-hun, stems from violent labor strikes that occurred at Ssangyong Motor Company in 2009. This turbulent period in Korea saw more than 2,600 employees laid off. That's nearly 40% of the workforce due to the car manufacturer facing financial ruin. Now, just imagine for a minute, you're the breadwinner of your family and you just get laid off like that. It can cause so much financial issues for anyone in this situation. So, of course, the announcement triggered a reaction. That being said, a 77-day occupation of the factory by the workers took place, and violent clashes between the strikers and riot police broke out. The workers armed themselves with slingshots and steel pipes and were against the armed forces that had rubber bullets and tasers. This chaos turned the factory into a battlefield, even with helicopters coming down to try and create winds so that it could throw people off balance and make it really hard for these workers to stand up for themselves. Not even to mention the psychological toll that these people had. The aftermath left a deep scar on South Korea's labor history, and many of the workers faced severe physical injuries and legal battles, which also led to financial ruin for themselves. Not even to mention the psychological toll. 30 deaths are attributed to suicide and stress-related issues in the years following these events. The conflict was more than just this one factory, but it symbolizes the struggles of the ordinary workers in an economy that's increasingly skewed towards the wealthy. This really shows the depth of the characters in the show and why there are so many people suffering from extreme debt, and crafting the central theme that anyone can fall to the bottom overnight, and the life and death toll people are willing to take just to try and change their life. Now, yes, you're probably listening being like, Lurk, you said real life Squid Games. And yeah, I did. And we're getting there. But I wanted to lay down a baseline of the easier stuff before we get into the darker stuff, which is the real life Squid Games that happened in South Korea's history. We got to take even a step further back in time than even 2009. That was more so just to give you guys an idea too of why the characters in the show are the way that they are, and why there's so many people facing these high debts or living in financial crisis, which it's not too different than what a lot of people are facing today as well, just not such an extreme situation as this 2009 occurrence. But buckle up, I hope you guys are ready for a more in-depth look. For this, we need to go back to the 1970s and the 1980s in South Korea, and we'll be coming back to the 1980s towards 1988 as well. If you have ever been in a city that has held an Olympic Games, you really see what a country or city is willing to do to clean up the streets. I'm from Vancouver, and we held the Winter Olympics in 2010, and I remember them loading up buses of homeless people and chartering them an hour plus away from the city just to try and clean up our streets a little bit and just dumping them on the side of the road. South Korea, before the 1986 Asian Games and the 1988 Seoul Games, they did something along those sorts, but with a little bit of spice, with a government program that was already set up in the 1970s. I've tried to do as much research as I can with this. There are two main versions I seem to keep coming across. I'm going to talk about both in tandem because they seem to come back to one cult-esque kind of group that had many locations hidden in rural South Korea. They were really hard to find. So please bear with me. And if you have more information or anything, please email me or let us know in the comments. Just please be respectful. All right? Imagine you're 12 years old, and one of your neighbors said that they would take you into the city for the day, and you're having a great time seeing the city for the first time because you're from this small town in a rural area. You're playing at an arcade and exploring, and you find that you have separated from the adults that took you there, and you can't seem to find them. Being a smart kid, you seek out the police station to help you. They say they're going to take you back home, but something's wrong. They didn't ask you where you were from. They put you in a white van with a bunch of strangers, ranging from other kids to elders, and you don't know where you're going. Imagine you're a father out looking for your son who's been missing for a couple years. You're so distressed. You've turned to alcohol over the years because you can't believe that you've lost your son. You can't find him anywhere. No one's helping. You go to the police again, begging for help to help find your son. But the police see you as a disgrace because you're this alcoholic man. Suddenly you're thrown into a white van. Now, imagine being a homeless person sitting on the side of the road. We don't know why you're there, right? Could be a factor of many things, right? You're seeing ads, the Olympics are coming into town. That's quite exciting. One day you're just sleeping. Next thing you know, you're being tossed into a white van. These are some stories that happened to people in real life. The government made a deal with a group that was all about welfare and rehabilitation to take on people or stragglers to clean up the streets around South Korea. The Brothers Home, or the Brothers Welfare, claimed to be cleaning up the streets and rehabilitating the lower class of citizens. The Brothers Home, which I will mostly be referring to it as, formed in the 1960s that contained over 20 factories and housed thousands of people ranging from homeless to children taken from the street and student protesters who opposed the government. These camps were home to some of the worst human rights abuses in South Korean history and was also nicknamed Korea's Auschwitz. Now let's take a breath for a second because this is a lot to take in really fast, especially being compared to Auschwitz. So everyone just, whew. Children being taken off the street and anyone who was deemed symbols of disorder or poverty were just thrown into vans, specifically white vans. And if you've watched Squid Games, you know about the van situation, and they were taken away. This is more than just cleaning up the streets for a world stage, and it had been happening for years. It started around the struggle to recover from the Korean War because it was so hard on people, and military groups that were trying to just clean up the streets and to clean up the mess, as some articles quoted it to be. Now, this clearly isn't how you should be helping or cleaning up your country after a war, but the military pushed these people into these rehabilitation or welfare centers. So like I said, there were several of these rehabilitation places that the Brothers Home had, and each one housed thousands of people. They had to work day in and day out. These are like 10-hour plus days. They would be assigned what factory they would be working in for that day and have to meet certain quotes and standards. There was anything from being a barber to fishing rod factories, textiles, etc., etc. Like I said earlier, there was about 20 factories, I think, at every single one of these locations. And I can't tell you how many locations there were. I couldn't find that information specifically because of them being so so hard to find. Now imagine being 7 years old or even younger than that, working with these intense machines or really hard physical labor, even just having to sew with a needle and thread or using these big machines to cut something. Kids don't really have the ability to work with these machines at that kind of age. And if anyone didn't reach certain quotas or misbehaved or refused things or weren't working fast enough, everyone would be punished. They underwent extreme beatings. If you cried or complained or asked to go home, you would be beat. Some of these kids that they're not kids when they talk, when they've come forward and talked about their experiences, but they talked about when they were a kid, they would be covered in scabs and the scabs would never heal and they'd get beat more and it would create more scabs or open those other scabs, and just being constantly covered in scabs with no time to heal. These people were also given one jumpsuit. You're like, if you're a Squid Games fan, you're like, jumpsuit? Yeah, it's one of those track suits, but instead of green like in the show, it was blue with stripes. They had only bunk beds and were in really long rooms with just rows upon rows of bunk beds, and there was 100+ people per long room. They were also only given about 30 toothbrushes to share among 130+ people. Their names were taken away. They all were given numbers, and that's what they had to answer to. Again, if you're a Squid Games fan, they went by numbers. They had no names anymore. And everyone also had to shave their heads. No one was allowed long hair. Not even the women. No one was allowed. It's what those barbers were for. There was 7-year-old barbers shaving other people's heads just so that nobody had long hair. They were given next to no food. Everyone was extremely malnourished and really tiny and thin. Some people, out of hunger, would catch rats that were running around the facility and eat those. There was a lot of sexual abuse happening, not only to the women, but the men too. There was a lot of women that if they showed signs of being pregnant after a sexual assault, they would be pulled into a room, injected with something. They were never told what it was, and then they were no longer pregnant. These women still have no idea what they were injected with. A lot of these sexual assaults happened in front of everybody. So remember, they're staying in these long rooms full of bunk beds, 100+ people in these rooms. Some people said like 4 or 5 guards would assault them at a time in front of everybody, and this went for men and women. There was also a separate building for disabled people, and it was nicknamed the Zombie Zone. That's because the guards kept them drugged all day so that they just laid there. So no one had to look after their needs or anything like that. They were just, you're going to stay in bed and you're drugged up. You can't move. And even if you could move and you tried to escape, you really couldn't. These factories and buildings were all surrounded by extremely high cement walls. And if you were able to get past the wall, there was always guards on the outside and you would be killed. So it's either stay inside the walls, deal with the daily beatings and the starvation and the really unhealthy situation, or death. And just let's let that sink in for a second, because the people that were in these facilities ranged from literally babies to elderly people and everywhere in between. It's insane to think that it was okay to clean up the streets by just taking random women, children, elders, whoever. If they didn't match the society's look or standards, you're in one of these camps. There's also a documentary you can watch about the brothers' home, and it's the survivors coming forward and telling their stories. I believe it's called Surviving South Korea's House of Horrors, but the name I did keep seeing was in Korean characters, and I can't read that. So if someone knows what the name is and can translate it for me in the comments, hell yeah, you're amazing. If not, I will have the documentary linked in the description. Some other things I have seen about the brothers' home is that one location in 1986 did force these people to play kid games. This took place in a bunker. This was a life and death situation. just like the Squid Games show portrays. And I've had a hard time finding a lot of information on this, so please take it with a grain of salt. It is said that the man who was responsible for these games was never found and never named. Again, if you have information about that, please reach out to me or let us know in the comments, because I really tried to look into this, but the biggest thing I got was just that brother's home is the biggest comparison to Squid Games. But there are images of a bunker that looks eerily similar to the Squid Games set. Even if you look up images of brother's home, you're going to see the rows of bunk beds, you're going to see their tracksuits, you're going to think that's Squid Games. The brother's home has been a huge secret in Korean culture due to the horrendous events and the extremes the government went against its own people and let this be okay. This place was shown to be a God-given place and showed people praying to God. They were being brainwashed that this was God cleansing them, which is so sick because that can destroy religion for people. And to use religion like that against people to make this seem like it's okay is so wrong, especially since they put a label on a person, threw them in here, no explanation, and then we're preaching to them that they're being cleansed and like God's punishing them. How horrible is that? If you're that 7-year-old kid that got thrown in there and you're being told you're being punished by God, like what? It's so sad and heartbreaking. But they would show the country images of the church time, obviously not to the extent of what was being said, but showing these people enjoying being at church and that they are rehabilitating these people. So a lot of people got a little bit of a twisted view on what the brothers' home was actually doing. December 1986, Mr. Kim, a prosecutor of South Korea, was out hiking and looking to hunt a little bit. He stumbled upon a group of people that looked really weird. Okay, so he kind of like stopped and watched them for a bit, and he noticed that there was people with really long wooden sticks that were beating the crap out of them, and that there was guard dogs also barking to keep everyone scared and high alert. He watched and saw these guards put people into barns with big steel locks on the outside. This freaked Mr. Kim out. He decided to investigate the area because, again, he thought he was going for a nice hike or was going to get some hunting in, and saw something really not okay, right? Because he had this bad feeling, he investigated the area and he found out there was about 900 kids working in this hard labor camp, with about 3,000 more living in terrible conditions, hard labor as well. Please keep in mind, this is only one location. I did say there was many. They were hard to find. Mr. Kim also found the office of the main leader, and over $2 million in cash was in the safe. The head leader of this welfare center was a man named Mr. Park. He was a very arrogant man, and he refused to tell the police anything when questioned, and basically said that he's done nothing wrong. He told the police he was anointed to the program by one of the highest people of the government. And by that, the leader of South Korea at the time and the government paid for him to run these camps. He would receive more money for bringing more and more people into the camps. Basically, he was rewarded for taking more people off the street. On top of the revenue that he was getting for bringing more and more people into these camps, the factories were something he put there. That wasn't something the government funded him to do. He decided to do that so that he could get free labor from these people. Any money from any of the products that were made in these factories on site went right into Mr. Park's pocket. He used the Olympics to clean up Korea. In his words, human trash removal. He claims he isn't a criminal because he cleaned up the streets. This is when Mr. Kim, our lovely prosecutor guy that brought awareness to this because of him just accidentally stumbling upon it while trying to hunt, he lost faith in the system. Period, in the country, due to the money and the power coming in to tell him to stop. For one, he was basically told to drop as many of the harsh charges that he possibly could against Mr. Park, because technically he didn't do anything wrong due to this being government funded, essentially, and him having backing from the dictatorship at the time. I just need people to stop for a second and think, like, this really shows that money speaks to a lot of people in power. This isn't just governments, but this is power in anything. When people are promised X amount of money, sometimes that can lead to people doing things that aren't the greatest. So like I had said, there was a dictatorship in South Korea at the time. So that really plays a part of laws and like what's happening in this time. That in mind too, please. So like I also said, most of the charges were dropped against Mr. Park. Only charge that I could find that he actually got was negligence, and he only spent 2 years and maybe 6 months in prison. These camps, the brothers' home camps, were shut down after 1987. But since it was a government program, they just changed the name of the program and created new locations. Over 38,000 people were found in one location. 38,000 people in one location that were victims of the brothers' home beatings, rapes, abuse. And keep in mind, again, that's children to elderly people. The trauma that people face stuck with these victims for years. Some of them have never been able to function in normal society again. Some having to go into different homes or living on the streets. Some experiencing high PTSD. And when you don't have the resources for help for that, that's really hard to live with. And, that can lead people down a dark path towards drug and alcohol abuse. So then you have overdoses, and then there's high suicide rates and all of that. And they've tried a couple times, a few of the victims, to bring this to court. The first time they tried, the court system turned it away because of it being outside of, I can't remember the word for it, but when something's past X amount of time, you can't fight it anymore or bring it up kind of thing. Like the evidence is nil and void because of time past. If you guys can remember that word, please help a sister out because I can't remember it to save my life. And my Alexa won't help me. Some of the victims also tried again in 2020, and the courts did decide to open the case again to look at it, but none of the victims have, from what I've seen, ever received help. So no help in trying to live a normal life, no help in paying for things, no help at all. They've had to try and survive on their own after all of these traumatic events. And then think about it too, people who spent 2 or more years or most of their life in these encampments being beaten day in and day out have no help. They're just on their own. So that's the story, guys, of the real life Squid Games. Brother's house, brother home, a little bit more of a cult than anything. Not even really, because people were just like shoved in here. Usually, I would say the definition of a cult is people willingly joining it, not this. I think if you were to look into this yourself, because it's intense, it really is the Korean Auschwitz, and it's so disheartening that people were treated this way. The fact that like little kids were just walking home from school being thrown into a fucking van and gone. The stories that I explained earlier before going into brother's home, the 7-year-old boy was actually 12 and the dad was his dad. The 12-year-old boy, when he was 14, so he had been in this camp for 2 years, saw his dad in the same camp, which is heartbreaking. And his dad, for some reason, kept a special kind of bread hidden. Again, remember, they weren't really given much food, and he had held on to this piece of food. And it was like something told him he was going to see his son, and he gave this food for his son, and it was probably like a month or so old. It was a special like holiday bar. The dad tried to feed his son, but the son also remembers like it was like his dad was not at all the man that he remembered either, and it was just really heartbreaking to hear about their story. So please look into this. I haven't watched the documentary. It's on my list now. I don't know if there's an English dub version out there. I believe it's mostly in Korean. If you do find an English dub, please hit me up. And I urge you all to always be aware of your surroundings, research things, and learn about where things come from, just so that this is Squid Games is a really enjoyable show, right? I think we can all agree, but there is a darker side to this, and not saying that the creators or anything are making light of heavy situations. I think they're shining light on a situation that happened, and is educating a lot of people from around the world on something that the South Korean history is trying to cover up a little bit, because not everyone wants to let their dark history shine through, right? But you can't hide history. You just can't. These horrific events happened. The only way to stop the cycle of history repeating itself is to educate everybody on events that happened. So please, please educate yourself. Look into things. Research is fun. Keep your mind young, all right? Don't let the hard work of researching get you down, because we miss parts of history like this and the justice that people deserve for things, especially since these people have not, as far as I'm aware, have still not gotten any help. And when you're watching the Squid Games, remember, this could be happening right now. Money makes the wealthy go crazy sometimes and can make good people do bad things. And that's it for this week's episode of Lurk Talks, and I'll see you guys next week. Be sure to follow me on all my social medias at alurker02. I hope to see you on my Twitch streams, Sundays, 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time if you want a tarot reading. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You'll find me playing Cyberpunk, Marvel Rivals, and The Last of Us. Outside of that, I hope to see you guys in my Discord. All links are down below in the description, and I'm going to leave you guys with this, and I want to see answers in the comments, okay? Would you play Squid Games?